Is David Johnson the top running back to own next season? Can Isaiah Crowell be a top 15 running back in 2017? And what coaching change is going to have the biggest fantasy impact next season? Plus, sitting in for Dave Gerzak are the 2016 Off the Grid champions John Modaff and Tom Zoretic, talking about bidding with real cash on their draft slots in that format, how their strategy changed with the weekly skins awarded, and their performance, and much, much more. We've got a great show for you. John Modaff and Tom Zoretic are here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your special Eric Balkman Show edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour starts now.
Live from the WRST radio studios in beautiful Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and heard around the world on the WRST stream.
All you Balkaholics, welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. I'm your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman, and my co-host, the patron saint of fantasy football, the Dizzle. Dave Gerzak is off this week, but sitting in for him tonight are a couple of more than qualified guests and veterans of the FFPC and Football Guys Players Championship. The pair came up just short in the 2015 FFPC Off the Grid Challenge, finishing as the runners-up, but this year they were able to win the league as well as the more than $10,000 in prizes that went with it from Team Chi-Town. Please welcome in my co-hosts for this evening, John Modaff and Tom Zoretic. Gentlemen, thanks for hanging out with me tonight.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have guests on that have won a lot of money, and clearly you guys did just that this year in the Off the Grid. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into how you won that league and so much more. Coming up on tonight's show, we'll discuss the forecast for the 2017 Kansas City backfield, how good Alshon Jeffrey could be next year in a new uniform, potentially, and what 2017 rookies will be the first drafted in Dynasty Leagues, plus much more. Shout out to the chat room right now. Post any questions you might have in there. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, you can do so at HSFF Hour, at Eric Balkman. You can post on our Facebook page, facebook.com/HSFF Hour. And if you want to chime in and talk with myself, with John, or with Tom, give us a call, 347-426-3682. That's 347-GAME-OVA. You can also email the show at the inbox, highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you have any questions for us, for John, for Tom, for myself, get them to us now. Rob, our mutual friend and producer, and our audio engineer, Bryce, will get those questions to us later on in the fantasy feedback section, later on in the show. We want to get into fantasy football, which is the crux of this show, and thanks for it. By the way, first of all, thanks for everybody who sent me the well wishes after the show last week. It was not a good situation for me. I tried to power through it, which is kind of stupid on my part, but Dave Gerzak, props to him. He did a great job. Talking with 2016 Football Guys Players Champion Mike Kuzma, who won the $250,000. It was awesome to hear from him. And thanks for all the well wishes. Thanks for tuning in on a Thursday night, too. I certainly appreciate everybody that is hanging out with us tonight a day early. And then, of course, everybody who is listening on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network Saturday afternoon. We certainly appreciate it as well. So let's get into it. Guys, go ahead and tell us what you're doing for a living when you're not crushing the off-the-grid league in the FFPC, as well as the other leagues that you play in. John, go ahead first, and then Tom, go ahead and follow up after him.
Well, Eric, I live here in Illinois, Northern Illinois. I own a finance company called CFS. We do car loans, personal loans, furniture loans. Keeps me pretty busy. I do have a wife and 3 kids, but huge Chicago fan, so that's pretty much what I do when I'm not playing fantasy football or going to Cubs games, that's for sure.
Well, go Cubs, go! Big year for you guys.
Yeah,
Congratulations
for sure.
on that World Series.
Tommy's a Sox fan, so he's not.
Yeah. I got that South Side blood. Yep.
Well, it's good. I mean, you guys, you have the yin and the yang for baseball, and clearly it worked out for you for football as well, as you guys made enough correct decisions together to win the off the grid title this year, $10,000 for the first place prize. I know you guys won a few thousand more than that when you count the skins that were awarded weekly in that format. So congrats on that. So let's get into this, because a lot of the listeners, and honestly, many of the FFPC players are not familiar with how the off-the-grid works. And in this format, you guys actually bid on your first 2-round draft slots. So you'll bid with real cash where you want to pick in the first round. You'll bid with real cash where you want to pick in the second round. Tell me, take me through your strategy, John, on what you wanted to do given this opportunity that you had to buy those first two draft slots. Tell me what the strategy was on what you wanted to do with those, and how well you guys ended up executing it.
Well, it was a little weird year because I couldn't make it out to Vegas, so I was on the phone with Tom, and he was there. So we were our strategy was to try to get the best running back. And when the first people bid on the first 3 selections, we thought that the 4 pick was our spot to go in and get David Johnson. We kind of targeted David Johnson from the start, before the draft. So when it came up to the 4th pick, we chatted and said, we got to go after this pick right here and get David Johnson, because the way people were, and through the whole, summer, and I, doing some of the football guys and whatnot, I mean, it was a receiver year, especially everybody put, receivers at a premium. So they were flying off the board. So our strategy was, hey, let's get the top running backs. So we got David Johnson with that 4th pick. Me and Tommy were, continuing to chat, and we're just watching it, tight end, Gronk comes off, receivers, it's just receivers kept flying off the board. And when we got that chance, Tommy, like I said, Tommy could even talk about a little about in that second round when we were on the phone, and we're like, but man, Zeke Elliott's still sitting there. He's still sitting there. We got to go after and get this pick too. So I think Tommy, do we have the 4th pick in the second round, or what do we have in that second round?
I believe so. I think it was again the 4th. I think we did those 4th and 4th, and what John said, it's exactly true. I thought, we saw a lot of receivers going off the board, and at that point you want to get the best quality pick for the best, for that price, and at that point, to me, I think we always feel that we have to always solidify the running game. The running backs seem to be, they're not a dime a dozen. The premium ones are very little. There's only so many of those opportunities out there, and they just kept presenting themselves. We just, you see the trend, and we kind of want to go against the trend in them situations. Are you going to go for the 5th best receiver, or are you going to go for the number 1 running back? And that kind of presented itself in the second round as well. I felt, at that point, at that point, there may have been 8 or 9 receivers gone, a tight end gone, and you're just like, we have 2 flex positions, so we could start 3 running backs. And if you see what we did in the 3rd round, I think maybe even the 4th
Ingram
round.
In the 3rd. Ingram in the 3rd round, then we took Cam in the 4th.
Yeah, so
and we still picked up Tevin Coleman and then Jay Ajayi, so we were running back heavy, that's for sure.
I think this sort of it continues the trend of what we've seen this year, and especially as far as guests we've had on the show the last month or two who have won big money in the FFPC this past season. They had running back dominant teams. They took running backs at the top of the draft, and it certainly paid off, especially the year of the receiver. The running back really rose to the top, at least the healthy ones did. And if you had them, you definitely did very well, like you guys did in this format. And one of the things about this format that I kind of touched on at the top, Tom, was the weekly skins that are awarded in the off the grid in the FFPC. Did the fact that these skins are being awarded every single week, did that change the way that you guys drafted or even played the waiver wire at all? Or was that sort of irrelevant in the way that you guys built this team, Tom?
You bring up a good question. And you can see people may want to trend in that direction where they're motivated by those weekly skins. And I think the way we look at it is we go into leagues looking to win the championship. I mean, the money's great, but we love titles. You know, we love bragging rights, and we build teams with the idea of winning the title. And I think if you do that, I think the weekly skins may take care of themselves. You know, they may materialize throughout the season. But, you know, if you're looking at weekly skins and you're looking for those big players that can single-handedly win you games, and, you know, sometimes those players can give you 30 points in the game and then next week give you 3 points. So I don't want to build my championship team based on that. I'm looking for consistency and solid performance, and honestly, I think durability. It's something that needs to be factored in more and more now is the durability. When you have to look at the players' bargaining agreement, and you see how these players are not preparing themselves with the preseason games, and there's all these injuries, you really got to find a guy who's solid and who's durable more now than ever before because of that collective bargaining agreement where the players are only limited to how much they can practice in the preseason.
John, let me piggyback off that question a little bit, because I think what Tom brings up with the durability concerns, that's definitely true with running backs. I think you can also apply it to receivers as well. But the fact that these prizes are being awarded on a week-to-week basis, did you guys find yourselves maybe tinkering with defenses, trying to stream the right defense, or maybe getting the right kicker in the right matchup in this format, or even streaming tight ends with maybe those lesser positions like kicker and defense? Did you guys find yourselves?
Yes.
Find yourselves, John, sort of spending a little bit extra time there, or was that, sort of like, oh, let's just play this like a regular season long, like a football guys players championship, like a main event league, and we won't worry too much about kicker and defense?
No, that's something we talked about quite often, actually. The defenses and kicker, we were kind of tinkering around because we had a little bit of problem at kicker, and then our defenses, with the FFPC and the way the scoring is you need defenses that are going to score, maybe get you a touchdown, or, the high sack defense, of course, the high turnovers, which are in, almost every fantasy league. But, that was one thing we did tinker with, because our main core, we were kind of solid through our main core, but, tight end position was a little weak. We had Barnage, we had Zach Miller, Barnage, underperformed. Yeah. Zach Miller really took off for us. Then he gets hurt, like he does almost every year, which kind of stinks. And then Hunter Henry's there. So, we had him. We were really tinkering with, pretty much the kicker, defense, tight end, and also our receiver. Yeah, like second receiver we'd start every week, or even our first receiver was something that we had to talk about and really, try to look at matchups, but also just try to play the hot hand. And it hurt us a few weeks, but, in the end it all worked out pretty well for us.
But you mentioned the receiver aspect, John, and Tom, that's something I want to get into with this next question. You guys had a trio of real good young receivers, young receiving talent on this team, in three guys: Stephon Diggs, Devontae Parker, and Sterling Shepard. Coming into the year, I think that all three of those guys were certainly getting a significant amount of hype as far as where they were going in drafts. As we look forward to 2017, because now these guys all have another year of experience under their belts, which of those three, between Diggs, Parker, and Shepard, Tom, are you guys most likely to own next season?
That was a fun question to think about, and right off the bat, I had thought, I had my mindset on Stephon Diggs because because of he was performing for us when he was healthy pretty effectively. There was weeks where he had like 14 targets and he'd have 13 receptions, and those are some monster numbers when you're making that many catches on targets. I always look at that target to catch ratio, and that's really a valuable part to evaluating these receivers. But doing a little bit, and John might agree with me too. I actually like Devontae Parker's upside. He's got some he's got a little gunslinger over there in Miami. He's got the new head coach. Adam Gazy. He's a solid offensive whiz guy that likes to get the ball moving around. And Devontae's got some size, and it's just
definitely potential. Yeah, in my mind.
Right, John? Do you agree? I mean, out of the three, is Devontae got some really huge upside? I think I don't know what you got in New York anymore.
He's got to stay healthy too. Yeah, he's really he's
right.
His thing, he was dinged up at Louisville, and he's dinged up at Louisville. He's been dinged up in the pros, but if he's healthy, I mean, he's a stud. I mean, he really is. He's a game breaker. Yeah. He's a game breaker there. Where Sterling Shepard's more your possession. Possession can get deep, but I mean, if you're looking for a game breaker that can really, get you a top 10 receiver, maybe if I had to pick one of those guys to be a top 10 receiver next year, I would pick Devontae Parker.
Yeah,
if you stay healthy.
I think
health, no injuries, health-wise, he could be
for sure,
right at it.
The talent is there, the pedigree is there, and I think you make a good point about Shepard. He's obviously not going to be the number one on that team as long as Beckham is there, and I think Diggs, you saw this year, the main value for him was all the targets that he got, and he turned a lot of small catches into good PPR performances, but he didn't exhibit that breakaway speed or game-breaking ability, save for I believe the Packers game this year. He really the first Packers game this year, he really had a great game. But outside of that, he was sort of in that non-explosive category, and I think Parker, to me, is the guy out of those three that, like I said, if he stays healthy, he's got the best shot at being a top 10 receiver. John, you also had a team finish out of 7,000 teams in the Football Guys Players Championship, John. You had a team finish in the top 100. Congrats on that. That is certainly something to hang your hat on as well. In that league, you picked 8th overall. You get David Johnson at the 108, and then when it comes around to you in the second round, you get Devontae Freeman, two guys that really, really played up to, and exceeded their draft value this year. Asking you to look in the crystal ball a little bit into 2017, but how likely is it, do you think, that you'll be able to get that kind of running back value at those 2 points in the draft again next year?
David Johnson, I think there's no chance he lasts to the 8th pick in the first round. I think he'll be easily probably, in my mind, top 3 pick. I mean, if not overall number 1, I mean, he's going to be fighting with, the Le'Veon Bells, the Ezekiel Elliott's, still even the Antonio Browns and whatnot. So I think he's going to be, a top 3 pick. Now, Freeman, I think, that spot in the second round, I think he'll be there because he has Tevin Coleman pushing him. So you're looking at you're looking at a split workload there, and they might even, start to push even harder towards more of a Tevin Coleman in Atlanta. I mean, we'll see, but I mean, they're both very explosive, but, they're both putting up numbers, and Devontae Freeman's been the go-to guy on that team this year, but I think they might start trending more to the Tevin Coleman aspect of that team with his size and some of his, quick one-cut running that he does well, which Freeman does well also, but that's what would scare me with, that not doesn't scare me as much, but, I mean, value-wise, I think Freeman is a definite number 2. Second round, mid-second round, even late second rounder, where I don't know if I'd take him high second round again.
John, does the off season, if Kyle Shanahan is gone, would that impact who would be the next offensive OC over there in Atlanta?
It depends who they sign and if he's going to be dedicated to that style of football, which they're accustomed to in Atlanta right now. They're on a they're on a freight train right now. They're really clicking.
They are clicking on all cylinders. Yeah.
When you think about it, let's just briefly touch on the Kyle Shanahan aspect, because it sounds like he is going to be the next head coach of the 49ers, and he will leave behind that high-powered Falcons offense that he did run so well the last couple of years, especially this year. And not a lot of people are talking about how good that Atlanta offense was this year. It led the NFL in points per game. It was fantastic. And, we don't know who the new coordinator is going to be. We don't know who's going to step in. But Tom, I'll pose this question to you. If Shanahan leaves, what do you think are the big takeaways from that Falcons offense? Julio is going to be a stud. Matt Ryan's going to be a stud. What changes initially off the top of your head if Shanahan leaves?
I think the consistency, the communication between coach and quarterback, there's always that trust value. And you see it a lot of times where quarterbacks are bumping heads with their OC, coach, and offensive coordinator, and on certain, plays and certain downs and, distances. And so that camaraderie, that flow, that the connection, that can have an impact, as you've seen, like with some teams in the past. I mean, I think I remember this was a problem with that team a year or so ago when Kyle was there, that, I think him and Matt Ryan were bumping heads, and there's a story about how they had to, get together in the off season to try to get that, cohesiveness between the two. And so I think that, those intangibles that have to be, mentioned or at least acknowledged, I think you have to be concerned about that. I think the Devontae Freeman is going to be Freeman, and Coleman's going to be Coleman, and Matt Ryan's going to be Matt Ryan. But if there's that missing link of communication, and that can backfire. I mean, I think Big Ben had that problem a couple of years ago with Coach Haley coming there, and then look at where they're at today. So there's that trust factor between the offensive coordinator and the quarterback that you really hope for, and you got to. And it can really be a difference from being a good team or a good offense to a great offense, I think.
Yeah, certainly. I totally agree that the trust factor is so important between head coach and OC, as well as head coach, quarterback, and OC, quarterback. You guys obviously had a trust factor this season, as we were talking with John Modaff and Tom Zoretic, the off-the-grid champs in the FFPC for 2016, $10,000 winners. We are going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll talk about the top 3 stud running backs as we enter 2017 drafts. You're listening to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour with Eric Balkman, Tom Zoretic, and John Modaff here on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott, those are the top 3 running backs at the top of 2017 rankings for many fantasy sites. I am Eric Balkman. You're listening to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. John Modaff and Tom Zoretic are my guests tonight, my co-hosts actually, sitting in for Dave Gerzak. They are the 2016 FFPC Off the Grid $10,000 winners. And John, let's talk a little bit about the running backs as we look how the first round will shape up in FFPC drafts next year. You already talked about David Johnson because he was your first-round pick in the off-the-grid format. He was also the first-round pick that you had in your Football Guys Players Championship team that finished in the top 100. If you're taking a running back in the first round next year and you have your pick of Johnson, Bell, and Elliott, which one are you going with? Is it Johnson again, knowing what we know now and assuming full health at draft time for these 3 guys, or is it somebody else?
I would probably lean Le'Veon Bell right now just because of the offense he plays, and if, pending he is, free agent, but I can't see him signing somewhere else. But, with that offense, the Arizona Cardinal question is, they had quite a down year with the age of Larry Fitzgerald, Carson Palmer's age, his health questions, with him getting hurt. I mean, he's the main guy, but, if I don't think you'd go wrong with either of the 3. I mean, I would love to have either of those 3 again, but if you pinned me down and said, who do I take? I mean, Le'Veon Bell is just, he gets so many targets coming out of the backfield as well. When you're PPR, David Johnson does too, but sometimes Bell's getting you 9, 10 catches plus 100 yards rushing. So it's something that, we'll see what they do next year with Ezekiel Elliott in Dallas, where if they try to get him the ball a little bit more coming out of the backfield, he's got that potential to be the 2,000-yard rusher and still catch 60 balls. But I think Le'Veon could catch 80 to 100 balls in a full season, as well as rushing for 1,600 yards. So I think I would go Bell.
Yeah, he definitely. I mean, he's the as important as Antonio Brown is to the Steelers. Bell certainly is the focal point of that offense.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly if you're looking at it from a PPR standpoint, he already had the quote earlier this week stating that he wants to transition to receiver once the brunt and the wear and tear of the running back position takes away some of his ability to be out there as much as he has been. So that's good. And he certainly is a very good pass catcher as well. So Le'Veon Bell makes a lot of sense at the 101. Tom, let's talk a little Kansas City Chiefs here, because this is a team that is already transitioning to next season after their elimination from the playoffs by the Pittsburgh Steelers this past Sunday. The backfield, to me, is interesting, and I think that this is one that is going to be important for fantasy owners to get right next season if they want to win their league or if they want to win, a national contest. Who do you think the Kansas City running back is that you want to own in 2017? Is it Jamal Charles coming off the injury? Is it Spencer Ware, who actually came out of nowhere this season to become a top 5 back when he was healthy? He sort of petered out as the season went on. Or is it somebody else that's maybe not even on the roster yet, a free agent, a rookie? What do you think the Chiefs will be doing as far as their main guy in the backfield next year?
Well, they've got those are two talented running backs with, and the way they like to run the ball. Coach, I think it's a tough call. I'd be a little tentative to pull the trigger on Jamal Charles. Maybe later rounds, I think, I would take a gamble on him, but I couldn't take a chance on investing a high round on Jamal Charles. He's kind of going on almost 2 whole years of not playing now, and that's not his first injury. So I think there's just too many risks involved with that. So if I had to pick one, it would be without a doubt I would go with Spencer Ware. He seems to have been more durable. He's had some pretty decent games. I think I've lost a couple close ones because of maybe on some of his performances this year. But even I remember going back to the season before when he just sprang out of nowhere and was just putting up some good fantasy points. So I would go with Spencer Ware. I don't know, does Kansas City pick up another running back? They've got these two to work with, and with Jamal Charles having a whole nother year to get healthy, I think they're going to be okay at running back. I wouldn't invest in a high draft pick on another running back if I was Kansas City.
John, let me ask you this. Do you think, as Tom was touching on that he believes Spencer Ware is the guy to own, and I think I would agree with him at this point of the season because we just don't know, what their plans are. But as we look at Spencer Ware being the lead back for Kansas City next year, do you think Jamal Charles can be a successful change-of-pace guy, maybe a third down guy as they work him back in, maybe even a 50-50 timeshare between Ware and Charles? Or is this, is it really possible that we could be saying that, no, Jamal Charles is done? He's not going to be a significant contributor anymore in fantasy football.
He, without knowing the exact specifics of, I knew he had the ACL injury, and then coming back, he had some problems, and I and don't quote me on this, but I think it was a little bit nerve related where he wasn't getting that response from his knee. When you hear any of that kind of talk, especially out of a running back, that really scares you. Now, I'm not in KC, I'm not in tuned as much to knowing exactly what's going on with him. But if he comes back healthy, I think he could be a hell of a back. But you're really rolling the dice with trying to pick him anywhere in the top half of any draft. You take a stab at him, 8th, 9th, 8th, 9th round or something, you're there. But he just, he's the guy that he's broken a lot of hearts over the last few years, and he's one that, you start seeing running backs like Tommy said. You're looking at like 2 years off, and he's already a pretty thin running back as it is. He's not taking the wear and tear, but also, what has that done to, you start getting a psyche aspect of it when you look at knees. I've had reconstruction knee surgery on each knee, and it really messes with your head, especially when he keeps getting hurt and hurt and hurt. That takes that fire away from a lot of guys. But, there's guys that it does put fire in their gut. But I really think, KC should focus with Spencer Ware and then hope maybe that Jamal Charles comes back. I don't know what his cap hit is. I mean, I could see them even releasing Jamal Charles depending on his health and what kind of cap hit he's going to have on him next year.
Yeah, that's true. We don't know what his interesting to see what his price tag is, and
it's got to be big because he signed a pretty big deal a few years back.
Yeah,
and
he's probably in his third or fourth year.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a very important decision that Kansas City is going to have to face when you think about how important Charles was to that organization, not just for fantasy aspects, but just as a chief and making that franchise go and making that offense go. That will be a tough decision if they do have to face it this offseason. Tom, let's shift focus back to two guys who will be drafted ahead of Jamal Charles this year and in the top end of fantasy drafts, no doubt. They are both members of the Houston Texans in Lamar Miller and DeAndre Hopkins. The offense really underwhelmed. It disappointed a lot of people in 2016. The Texans eliminated by the Patriots this past weekend in the playoffs. They're looking to retool for next year. At this point, would you be willing to draft DeAndre Hopkins or Lamar Miller in the first or second rounds in drafts this summer if you were faced with the opportunity, or if any of the listeners were faced with that opportunity, taking Hopkins or Miller that early? Or are these two guys that you're going to shy away from because of the questions at quarterback, because of how the offense really suffered this year? Are they two guys to avoid for you? Or, is one good, one bad? What are your thoughts on those two Texans?
It's an interesting scenario over there in Houston, and everybody saw how the season kind of materialized and unraveled. I think Brock is not the answer. I'm not sure if he can even retool his mechanics to be that guy. And it really impacted D-Hop's value in fantasy football. I would stay away from both of those in the first two rounds and let those two be someone else's headaches. I don't know. Lamar Miller, still, I'm not sold on him. He comes out of Miami. I think in Miami he never even got 20 touches, and something to be said about that. And I think you saw sometimes he would disappear a lot throughout the season and in games. And really, I don't think he gave you that significant impact number one running back punch that you were hoping to get, which people drafted him in the first round this year. And I think you'll get more of the same. I think he's a good running back with a good running back coach mentality and a good line, but I don't know, for some whatever reason it doesn't seem to add up. And if Brock can't get the ball down, and it's not going to, D-Hop's not going to get his hands on some of those passes that are going over his head. If you look at, again, I mentioned earlier about the target to catch ratio, there's a perfect example where you see D-Hop would get like 4 catches on like 12 targets. You just can't have that inefficiency and try to be successful in fantasy football.
Let's get to we're going to get to some listener emails later on in the show, but I do want to get a couple out of the way right now. And Tom, I'll pitch this first one to you. This is from Steve in Jacksonville, Florida. He writes, what are the chances that Jordan Howard is a true 3-down back in fantasy next year? And if he is, how high do you think you would draft him? Congrats on the grid championship. That is Steve in Jacksonville, Florida. Thank you for the email, Steve. Tom, Jordan Howard was fantastic this year coming out of Indiana. The second leading rusher in the NFC. Might have been the second leading rusher in the NFL, now that I think of it, behind Ezekiel Elliott. But as you look at what the Bears plan on doing in 2017 as far as the backfield goes, is Howard the 3-down guy there? And how high will he go in drafts?
Well, we are from Chicago. It's our hometown team, so we definitely feel like we got a little bit better insight on our hometown team than most. And it is a good question. I think he definitely can be a 3-down back, and he's a workhorse with some nifty footwork that he can get through some openings, some little openings, and he can explode through some of those holes. So you just saw his development was just amazing as the season progressed. And, he's going to be trending really high, I think, in the off season, and for good reason. We had some serious injuries on the offensive side as well as the defensive side, but we had some serious injuries, and yet we were still able to be productive. And I think that has something to be said about the head coach and, that running back and the head coach's philosophy. So, if John Fox is there and Howard's there, you're going to get production out of this guy. And, I would love to get him in the second round, but, I don't know, first round, maybe late first round, but I would love to see him in the second round. But I say late first round. I mean, off the top of my head, thinking now, with the running backs and the receivers out there, I can see him trending as high as a late first round. I'd like to see him maybe in the second round, and that's golden to me. If I can get him middle of the second round, I'd love it. I'd be shooting.
John,
for
what do you think about Howard when you think of his ceiling next year? Is a top 5 running back season out of the question for him? Can he do that? And is he the type of guy that, if he is going to have that type of season, that you guys, or if you believe that he's going to have that type of season, is he the type of guy that you guys would look at if you had a late first round pick and getting him at the turn, or needing to take him at the turn in the second round, at like the 203, the 204, somewhere around there? Do you think that this is what we can expect, or at least hope for, with Jordan Howard next year?
Yeah, I definitely think he has the ability. I mean, we gotta solidify the quarterback position in Chicago, or get some kind of stability in that position. But the offensive line, we've got a stellar center of the offensive line coming back in Chicago. Need a little bit of a, right tackle / maybe some more help on the left side, left tackle. But he's a guy that he always falls forward. I mean, if, the Bears weren't good this year, so a lot of people didn't probably watch tons of Bears games. But he's a guy that when you watch a running back, and he always is going forward. That's something that's a very good key. When he gets hit, he's going to get that extra yard. When he's out wide, if he's can get around somebody, he's going to get he's going to get that extra 5 yards, maybe break a tackle. And he's the guy that can catch the ball. I'd like to see him, personally, I'd like to see him maybe lose 5-10 pounds, similar to what Le'Veon Bell did. Le'Veon Bell was that bigger back, but I mean, if he could, maybe take 5, 10, 15 pounds off him, I think it could even make him more explosive and even better in the pass game. So I do think that end of the first round is a pretty good spot for him if the stability is there. I mean, if we're going into the season next year with Matt Barkley as our quarterback, it's going to be tough because teams are going to have a whole year.
It's almost isn't it like Todd Gurley almost? I mean, it's where they don't have a passing game, then they're going to stack the box, and you'll see Howard's numbers diminish. But we really need some type of passing game, and like you said, John, if Barkley's the man at the helm, and Jeffries is gone for free agency, then you got to factor that in. They have to have some type of passing threat you got to. Otherwise, you'll have a Todd Gurley situation where they're stacking the box and stop the run and go man to man on the receivers and see if you could beat us.
Well, great points. I certainly appreciate that insight, and I know Steve in Jacksonville, Florida, appreciates that insight as well. The next email, we're actually going to keep it in the NFC North and talk about another running back, sort of a new running back. This is Kenny in Cincinnati, Ohio, writing, do you guys think Green Bay keeps Ty Montgomery at running back next year? Who will be the guy to own in that backfield in 2017? John, I'll let you take this one. But when you look at the Packers' backfield, Eddie Lacy's a free agent. James Starks is a free agent. Ty Montgomery was moved to running back sort of out of necessity this year. After all the running backs went down, Kristen Michael is certainly, they're not married to him long term, so he could be gone as well. And this is a deep running back draft as well. So as you look at sort of prognosticate the Packers' backfield next year, is Montgomery a part of it, and is he the guy to own in Green Bay as far as the running backs go in 2017?
I do not think he's their long-term answer. I do think, I think Eddie Lacy is gone. I think his time in time in Green Bay is definitely over. I mean, he's going to sign with somebody else. Starks is, up there in age. He's hurt all the time. I mean, I think that's something that the Green Bay does. I think they go after a young kid in the draft, maybe in the second, third, fourth round. They might go out and, try to pick up a free agent. I mean, stuff you've heard too. You never know. I mean, you're looking at guys like Adrian Peterson. He might be a stopgap guy that, he might want to put it to Minnesota if they don't want to sign him. I mean, Green Bay, why not go and try to play with Aaron Rodgers? But I don't think Ty Montgomery's their starting running back next year. That would shock me if he is, just because, he did play running back at Stanford a little bit. He was kind of a do everything guy when he was over there in Stanford, receiver, slot back, played tailback a little bit, but I don't think he's a long-term answer. He had his best game against the Bears, which, hurt me in one league pretty bad. He had I think 162 yards or I don't know the exact numbers there, but that was the best game of the year in Soldier Field, and it was, I would be shocked if he is the starting running back in Green Bay next year. That would be very shocking to me.
For fantasy, it's obviously going to be a relevant conversation who that running back is going to be in Green Bay, because the Packers offense has been very, very good the past few years, and especially the way Aaron Rodgers is playing right now, it's been great. As you look at that running back situation next year in Green Bay, Tom, do you believe that the guy to own that will be drafted highest is actually probably going to be drafted this year into the NFL? Is it, like John said, a day two, a second, third round pick that ends up leading the Packers in backfield touches in 2017?
I do. I think it's going to be an off-season move in a draft or free agency. I don't know, but definitely they're going to scrap what they're working with, and they're going to start fresh. And no better way to do that than find the talent, in the draft, and I think their system is a system where it takes a lot of if it's a running back, say a high picked running back in the draft, I don't think there's going to be a lot of pressure on that player. You got Aaron Rodgers there, you got the passing game. I think whoever can come in there can blossom, and the organization and if Aaron Rodgers and the fan base, embrace that player, he can develop into what they need. And so I think it's going to have to come from the draft. Honestly, I think they're going to have to maybe make some moves, try to move up the draft list, target some of the better running backs in it, and go that direction.
Yet another compelling situation and story to follow in the offseason as it is fast approaching here for fantasy owners. Guys, you've been so gracious with a lot of your prognostications for next year, but let's get a little specific here and give us a guy that you think, as of right now, and obviously we have a whole offseason in front of us, a lot can happen, but as you look at how the NFL is shaping up for this coming season right now, give us a guy that you think might be a little bit overdrafted next year based on how he finished this past season, and then another guy who might be flying under the radar when drafts start kicking up into gear, May, June, July. A guy that maybe might be underdrafted when satellites start up even in February. John, I'll let you go first with your two guys, and then Tom, go ahead with your two right after that.
Okay.
Yeah, looking at, this is a great question because there's always guys that really, you see guys that people fall in love with after a few games or even a season. But the guy I'm going to say is going to probably be overdrafted is a guy that has been a high draft pick many times is LaShawn McCoy. He's a guy that has broken so many hearts in his day as far as with his injuries and whatnot. But he had a hell of a year. Now, again, that there's turmoil there in Buffalo, but somebody's going to take him up high. Probably might even be in the first round because he had a hell of a year this year. But with his injury risk, with the turmoil in coaches, I think next year is going to be a very down year for LaShawn McCoy. That's one guy I don't want to touch next year. I mean, as of right now, of course things could change a bit, but his injury risk and his the turnover in the coaches. Who knows who the quarterback's going to be? I mean, you look at Tyrod Taylor, might be a Bear next year. You know, he could be a 49er. I mean, there's, he's being shopped and whatnot, or they might just, release him. But he's the guy that, I think he's going to be drafted too high. I mean, I'll take another little tidbit. I hope I don't take Tom's guy, but a guy like Tyreek Hill, I think, will be overdrafted. And you see teams are starting to figure him out a little bit, but I think some people might, fall in love with some of that big playability. But, he's a guy that I think could maybe get you, you could look at weeks where he might have one catch for 8 yards and really be putting you behind the 8 ball. Guys, when I was just kind of looking at stuff, just, brainstorming a little bit on guys that I think might fly under the radar. A guy I talked about earlier, a guy like Tevin Coleman. I mean, I really think that he's going to, depend on the offensive coordinator. I just think he's going to be a guy that might explode next year and might be able to take that job from Freeman, if it gets down to it. I mean, they're both excellent, but I think he's a guy that might fly under the radar. And another kid, similar, in that New York Giants backfield, a guy like Paul Perkins. I mean, is he going to get the reins in New York? I think he has the ability to, with a year of seasoning under his belt, to maybe break out next year with the ability to catch the ball. He did quite a bit of that, in college and even this year. But, those are a couple of running backs I think could definitely break out and be in the, I don't think Tevin, if he had, injuries, could be a top 5, top 10 back. But, Perkins has that ability to be a very, very serviceable, good starter for you, that could catch quite a few balls and, get you some yards there, later in the draft next year. I'll hand it over to Tom, see what he's got.
Yeah. He stole a couple of mine there. And,
man, I did.
Great minds think alike.
Great minds think alike, right. Chi-Town. So I think overdrafted, to add to what John said, so I don't say the same thing over again, I would then, a couple other names that are high on my list is like Todd Gurley. I think people are going to still look at him as this great number one RB number one, if not RB number 2. It'll trend that way, and I just don't like anything that's going on over there. And unless they revamp a lot of stuff in the off season, just basing it on what we know now, I think he may go too high. I think Lamar Miller may go too high, and I know what also another one is. DeMarco Murray, and I had him in John's big money league here in Chicago, which I actually won 3 years in a row, but that's another story. Yeah. So, John, you can talk a little bit about that, if you like. But
I don't remember that. Sorry, I don't remember those.
So we had DeMarco Murray, and he shined, he produced. But what I saw happen towards the end of the season is, Henry kept being a vulture down there in the red zone, and they drafted Henry high for a reason. And DeMarco really gave them a lot. He could be, based on his performance this year, get maybe drafted a couple of rounds too high. And you wonder what's really going on over there, because they really like their Henry. So I'd be careful about that, and keep a close eye on how things are, playing out in the preseason over there with those two running backs. So overdrafted, I say Gurley, Lamar Miller, Todd Gurley, and DeMarco Murray. Under the radar, one that I don't know why I feel connected with this one is Kelvin Benjamin. I feel like last year he didn't play because he was hurt. This past season he did pretty good, but he had a Cam Newton that just seemed to be off all season. I think their offensive line was weak. Cam was running a lot for his life and getting smacked around. And I think if Carolina solidifies that offensive line, you're going to get a Cam Newton that we saw the year before, and that's going to be an opportunity for Kelvin Benjamin to capitalize on. Another one off the radar, something with New England, and receivers and just players in general just redeeming themselves and having a new energy to their career, however you want to word it. But I think with Michael Floyd stays there, it'd be interesting to see what happens there with New England and Michael Floyd and with Tom Brady at the helm. It's really interesting to see what could happen there. I keep an eye on that. And
that makes a lot of sense, Michael Floyd. Michael Floyd too is a guy that we've talked about him on the show ever since he got signed by New England, and there's certainly a lot of potential there. I think that that's a keen eye on that one, Tom. He's going to be a free agent, but it sounds like New England wants him back, and obviously he's going to have an opportunity on national TV to make a name for himself when they take on the Steelers on Sunday night too. So I think that is going to be a guy that we're going to pay attention to. We're definitely going to pay attention to what John Modaff and Tom Zoretic are saying tonight because they won the FFPC off the grid in 2016, more than $10,000 in prizes. When we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the news going on around the NFL right now and how it affects your fantasy teams for this coming season. Eric Balkman on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. John Modaff and Tom Zoretic from Team Chi-Town, the 2016 FFPC Off the Grid champions. More than $10,000 went into their pockets thanks to that big win. Congratulations to you guys, and thanks so much for hanging out, sitting in for my normal co-host Dave Gerzak on the show tonight. Let's get into some news. Quickly mentioned, there are plenty of Dynasty Orphan teams at myffpc.com. Check those out on the forums. The picks, the players, they're all listed on there. And feel free to email Dave at myffpc.com with your best offer. Some of them have been flying off the shelves pretty quickly. Others are still out there. So, sometimes your best offer will get taken by Dave. As he always says, depends on kind of mood he's in. So check that out at myffpc.com. Thanks to Football Guys, Roto World, RotoPass, and Rob for tonight's rundown. First up, Adam Thielen, the Minnesota Vikings receiver, going to be restricted free agent at season's end, according to Spotrac.com. Thielen will be tendered. It probably will not be the original round tender because he is a fourth-year undrafted free agent. He is set to be the Vikings' number 2 receiver to start 2017. He'll be competing with Laquan Treadwell for that spot behind Stephon Diggs. Thielen definitely showed that he has the chops to play in the NFL and play very well. John, as we look at that Minnesota Vikings receiving core, does Adam Thielen hold off Laquan Treadwell for the majority of the 2017 season to be the second wide receiver drafted from Minnesota?
That's a great question. Laquan, they picked him in the first round last year. He's another local product here in Illinois. Went down to Ole Miss, but he's got the talent now. Something didn't click this year for the kid, so this offseason is going to be very important for him. Now, on pure talent, I think Laquan Treadwell should be the number 2 guy in Minnesota, but Adam Thielen really made a name for himself late in the year down, up in Minnesota, and he's there. Now, if I had to roll the dice, I think they really want Treadwell to be the number 2 guy, and that means a lot when you're GM, your coach. I think they really want him to be the second guy, and I think he can. So, if I was a bet man, I think Treadwell would be number 2 next year.
When we look at the Redskins, they're going to have some decisions to make with their receivers as well, as it might be a bit of a transition next year for Washington. Pierre Garçon is one of them. He is going to be a free agent, or excuse me, he is not scheduled to be a free agent, but he might be released from his contract in Washington. He says that he doesn't want to be called a possession receiver because he can do more than what Washington asked him to do within the constraints of that offense this past season. John Keim from ESPN.com reporting this. He had a 13.1 yard per catch average. That was 49th in the league. Deshaun Jackson led the NFL with a 17.95 yard per catch average. Of course, they were both teammates in Washington, fulfilling different roles for Kirk Cousins and that Redskins offense. Playing the possession role was what Garçon was asked to do. He did it very well. His yard per catch average was a 3-yard rise from his average for his Washington career there. Now, as we look at how this affects fantasy, This is a guy that might be on a different team next year, a guy who might be playing a little bit of a different role on his new team, in his new offense. Tom, if he is released, if he is on a new team, are we undervaluing Pierre Garçon a little bit right now based on what we assume his skill set to be in 2017?
No, I don't think so. I think Pierre Garçon is who we know him to be. I think, he's up there in age, and I think that 13.1 yards per catch, I think his last few games of the season really jacked it up. I think I took a brief look at that once. I remember his last few games, he averaged like 24 yards a catch or something ridiculous. So I thought that might have increased that average. But if you look at his body of work the whole year, if you're looking at, I think he can excel very well as a possession receiver and have a very long, extended career. But I think, players are going to want to self-promote themselves and say they can do more than they can, and they all think they can. It's an alpha male kind of business where they all want to be dominating and they have to sell themselves. But I think he should just, if he just focuses on that and just and executes that position and tries to perfect it, he can really extend his career. And so I think if he has, I don't know, I think of him like an Anquan Bolden, just think someone who can, be productive and be a possession receiver. I think that's what you see is what you get. I don't know if you can get more than that. I think he's like 30 years old too, so I think he's kind of up there in age and he's got some tread on those tires. I think he left, so I think he could do okay at that position. So I think if he stays in Washington, it's not going to be any better or any worse. I think Washington needs to improve their running game. I think they're kind of crowded at the receiver position. I think you got Reed out there, you got Crowder, you have D-Jax. So I don't know. It's iffy to me if he could be anything more than what he is.
John, Isaiah Crowell is going to be a restricted free agent for the Cleveland Browns this upcoming season. 198 rushing attempts, 952 rushing yards, 40 catches, 319 receiving yards, all career highs this past season. Do you think that it's possible the Browns turn Crowell into a top 15 fantasy running back this coming year, or were those numbers closer to, maybe his ceiling than we'd like to admit, and he actually outperformed what his production will be this coming year?
I think he can improve on the numbers. I said a top 15 back. I think it's very attainable for Isaiah Crowell. I mean, look at their quarterback. Would they go through 5 or 6 this year if they had playing quarterback for Cleveland? And he still averaged 5 yards a carry. That's pretty good for a team that's on the 4th, 5th string quarterback. And it doesn't seem like Duke Johnson is panning out to be exactly what they want. So I think that job, with keeping him, I think that he runs hard. He hits the holes. They got a great left tackle over there in Cleveland. They're trying to build a few more, get some more offensive linemen there. But I think he'd easily get into that 1,300 range, 1,300 yards rushing, maybe catch 40, 50 balls, just depending on, if they want to bring Duke Johnson in on those third downs, that could affect his production. But I definitely think he could be a top 15 back. And, I think it'd be smart for them to keep him, to have that guy that they can rely on.
Let's talk about Alshon Jeffrey here, Tom. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent this offseason. Missed 4 games this year due to a PED suspension, but while he was on the field, he looked pretty good despite the constant changing at quarterback that Chicago had this year. Jeffrey played under the franchise tag this past year. As you look forward to 2017, Tom, can he be first of all, do you think he's a Bear this coming year? And can he be a top 10 wide receiver next year, dependent upon where he lands?
Big question mark there. I don't trust him. I think here in Chicago, I would say most of the fans here are disappointed with him overall. He's not reliable. he's had injuries in college. He's had injuries every season that he's played in the pros. I don't think he looked that great when he did play. And, great players usually make other players around them great too. I mean, you got some of these, when you talk about a great receiver, usually that great receiver ends up making that quarterback great. And I'm not sure if he's that guy. I'm not sure if he can make the people around him great. So that means he can't. If he can't be great, then they can't be. So I'm frustrated with Alshon as a fan, but in fantasy football, I think he'll be. And he was actually one of the names I had on that list, and I didn't mention him, but I think he'll be overdrafted because I don't think people know him like we know them. Outside of Chicago, maybe they see him in a different light, but he can't stay healthy. And if he stays in Chicago, I don't know what you're going to get at the quarterback position. So he has to really end up landing in the right place with the right offensive scheme, and he has to stay healthy. And, yes, he can then end up being really good, but I don't think he'll be great. I don't think he'll be a top 10 receiver. That's for sure. I wouldn't put him in the top 10. And so that's how I feel. I don't know if he's going to – John, you may have a little more of an opinion on this. You think, Alshon's going to be here next year? I'm not sure.
He's the way he's kind of not running his mouth. I mean, he's talking about the Bears, can win the Super Bowl next year and doing these kind of things, and they got the guys to do it. The NFL is almost like any, it's not like almost any other sport. You can't. The NFL, some teams you'll see a team go from 4-12 to 11-5 or 12-4, but that's usually somebody that had some kind of stability, at the quarterback position. But yeah, like you hit it right on the head, Tom. I mean, Alshon, when he was in college, I mean, he looked like a world beater, but then he was hurt. When he comes to Chicago, he gets hurt. He gets hurt, he gets suspended. I mean, he tries to say the right things, but he's not, he's a team killer. Like you said, if you overdraft him and you miss him for 5-6 games a year, that kills your team if he's your number one receiver. Your team, your fantasy team, as well as the team that has him, because you're investing money, and money into a guy that can't stay on the field. There's a lot of quotes that, you got to be able to stay on the field. I mean, and he's never proved that, and that's why I really don't think another team in NFL is going to give him the contract he thinks he deserves, unless some team is very desperate. I mean, does he want to go to Cleveland? I mean, they got money to spend. I think they have I don't know if Cleveland's got the most cap room, but where do you go? And I don't think a team. I think they watched it. He got his PED suspension. So what if something happens with that again? I think that's a year-long suspension. If he screws up or something, if he drops dirty on something, he might not play for a year. I think if you got that 4 game, I think the next one's either 10 or 10 games or a year. So you can't count on him. Like you said, Tommy, it's frustrating as a Bear fan because he's got every tool in the book. He's big, strong, he's got speed. He can get that jump ball, with the best of them in the league. But when you're on the sidelines in a warm-up, you're not going to be helping your team at all.
Excellent stuff, guys. I certainly appreciate this insight, not only on Alshon Jeffrey, the great stuff from Jordan Howard, you guys had on Jordan Howard as well. That is exactly what we're looking for. And we are going to dip further into your fantasy minds right after this break when we have you answer some listener emails. I'm Eric Balkman on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour with John Modaff and Tom Zoretic, the FFPC Off the Grid champions for 2016. You are listening to the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. Conference Championship Weekend is here, and we are bringing you some great fantasy advice for 2017 and sort of recapping what happened in 2016. Nobody better to do it than John Modaff and Tom Zoretic of the Chi-Town franchise in the Fantasy Football Players Championship, winning the Off the Grid Challenge this year and the $10,000 plus that went along with it. Let's get into some emails, gentlemen.
Got a question for Eric Dave or tonight's guest? Send them a tweet at HSFF Hour on Twitter. Email the show at highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. Post it in the chat room during the broadcast. Hashtag your tweet with HSFF or just smack Eric in the head. That's highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com or at HSFF Hour on Twitter.
We'll pitch this first email to Tom. This is from Tony in Spring Grove, Minnesota. Hello, HSFF Hour. The season is over for me as a Vikings fan, and I am already looking at free agents to be. Are there any that you're looking at to see where they land, or is this more of a ho-hum class for fantasy for you all? Love your podcast. That's Tony in Spring Grove, Minnesota. Tom, I don't know if you have any strong feelings on the free agent class. John touched on it earlier. Le'Veon Bell's a free agent. I don't think any of us think that he's going to get away from Pittsburgh. I think that there's a lot of, restricted free agents that will end up staying with their teams. For me right now, there's not a particular name that's really standing out to me that I'm super excited about, because I don't think that they'll be moving or switching teams, or I just don't expect a ton from fantasy, from the fantasy value aspect of it. Is there any free agents out there that you think could be interesting depending upon where they land?
That's an interesting topic, and kudos to the guy in Minnesota for bringing this up. I feel it's a very ho-hum kind of free agency coming into this when it comes to like receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, players like that, where offensive players like like you said, Bell isn't going to go anywhere. I think Latavius Murray, is he a unrestricted free agent? I don't know.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what they do there. They've got some guys in the back behind him. I wouldn't be surprised if he's looking for, a big payday. He's young. He's 25. He's pretty good. Be interesting what happens there if they try to retain him or not. I think, but other than that, there's really no superstars that are going to go anywhere. So what I actually found interesting when you talk about free agency, I look at the offensive line and see what teams are really, solidifying their O-line, and pay attention to that. You see these guys that shore up that offensive line, and it ends up making that quarterback or that running back or that wide receiver better. And so watch out for that, because there are some teams that really their offensive line hurt them a lot. And if there's a lot of moves, not big moves, but if they do a lot of moves, or they sign a lot of free agent offensive linemen, quality ones, and you see the durability behind those that were signed and where they came from and what their grade is, may want to follow that and be interested in that running back or receiver or on that team. So that's about it. And you can, your O-line can make or break the production of your fantasy football players that you draft. So pay attention to the offensive line and where people are, if teams are losing them, and what teams are losing their offensive starting linemen, and which teams are getting them. And
I totally agree with that. I was just going to say offensive line, and I'm with you, Tom. I think it's so underrated when we talk about free agency and how these things affect not only the running backs, but the quarterbacks, the receivers, the tight ends. It has such an impact on the offense, and I think that as much as we want to pay attention to what running back signing where, what receiver is going to hit, what new team, I think offensive line definitely is something that we need to pay just as much attention to as well. John, let's pitch this one to you here. This is from Jack in La Mesa, California. We have a bunch of new coaches and coordinators hired for next season. Who is going to help or hurt the fantasy value of the studs on his new team the most? Hope Balky's Packers lose. That is Jack in La Mesa, California. Well, Jack, thank you for the email. Thank you for the positive love on the Packers this weekend. John, we have Anthony Lynn in San Diego. We have Sean McVay over in Los Angeles. We have Sean McDermott coaching Buffalo. We have Vance Joseph in Denver. There's San Francisco obviously may or may not hire Kyle Shanahan. We believe that he probably will be the next head coach there. But we have a bunch of coordinators and head coaches said. Is there any, I mean, what's the impactful one? Or are these new guys in these new places not going to have the impact that we might expect with philosophy changes and offensive changes with these new teams?
That's a great question too. I didn't do much research, but when you're looking at McVay going from Washington over to LA, can he bring a little magic to that team? Like Tommy is saying, you got a few pieces, or you got guys like, Todd Gurley. You got an absolute stud running back, but you're just sitting there. Is Jared Goff going to be the answer? Is he going to be the guy that can, improve his game next year to make the guys around him better? You already got a stud running back, but with that offensive line. But McVay, that Washington offense was very explosive. I mean, he took, you're looking at, an offense that, just move the ball. I mean, you look at all of a sudden, Kirk Cousins is a stud and whatnot. I mean, if he can get Goff to his potential in LA, I think that he might be able to have something there. Also Vance Joseph in Denver, he's a guy that they got weapons there. You're looking at Emmanuel Sanders, Marius Thomas. You're looking at, we'll see what happens with the running back position, if they're going to keep C.J. Anderson or, whatnot with Booker. But, I mean, he's got some guys there, so I don't know who he's bringing in to run his offense. I haven't seen that yet, but that's something to watch, too, is who's there in Denver, and do they put stock in Paxton Lynch? Do they leave Trevor Siemian as a quarterback? But those two places, I mean, McDermott, I don't know what he's going to do there, especially if they get rid of their quarterback, without Tyrod Taylor. I don't know what, I think he could, I wouldn't say hurt his team, but I think he could hurt his team of those coaches you talked about. I'm thinking that he, just depending on what he gets there, I don't know. That's a tough position to run into there. You're looking at guys that are injured. Look at Sammy Watkins in Buffalo. He can't stay on the field. We talk about Alshon Jeffrey. Sammy Watkins is even worse at staying on the field. But, I think he would have probably the least impact would be in my book. But I think, McVay and Joseph, depending on, who Joseph hires to run his offense, those would be my two guys to watch.
Yeah, I think that you make a lot of good points there. I think they hired Vance Joseph has Mike McCoy back in Denver now running things.
I did see that. Yep. That should be pretty good.
And so, like you said, John, he's going to have those pieces there. Lynch, Thomas, Sanders, Anderson, Booker. I mean, that's going to be an exciting team to watch. With what Mike McCoy has been able to achieve as a pretty successful offensive coordinator in the NFL, I think that is going to be an exciting one for fantasy. We do have time for one last email. Rob is telling me here, so I'm going to make it a good one. We'll throw out some names on this one. John, you can kick us off, and then Tom fire away after him. But he writes, this is Quentin in Grand Rapids, Michigan, excuse me. Hi, Balky and Gerzak upgrades. Well, clearly you guys have been upgrades on Dave tonight. Can you give me a rookie draft primer on who you expect the top picks to be for Dynasty this season? Thank you for the email, Quentin. John, I'll throw this to you first. Rookies, we don't know where they're going to land yet. Most rookie drafts take place after the NFL draft. But some of the rookies that you're excited about potentially owning in Dynasty this year.
Well, in my Dynasty team, I didn't have a very good year, so I do have the number one pick because I won basically the toilet bowl. I'm going to have my pick. Now, the two main guys I'm watching, because I'm very thin at running back, are Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook. Fournette he's the prototypical big, strong, fast Adrian Peterson stud, coming out of LSU that can be that dominant guy, can be that Ezekiel Elliott, depending on where he lands. Now, Dalvin Cook is also a game breaker, a guy that can run like a 4.3 40 down in Florida State that can just bust open a game, but still strong enough to run over some people. So those two guys right there, and I don't want to take all of them. I don't want leave a few for Tommy there. Those are my two main guys that I got to make a decision on after the draft on who I'm taking number one in my Dynasty League, because a lot of it will depend on where they land. Out of those two running backs, I think they're both studs, but where they land will make my decision a lot easier. So I'll pass it off to Tommy. I don't want to take a few of these other guys I'd like to talk about, but I'll let him.
Thanks, John.
Collaborate.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'll be quick on this. First, John, you should have drafted me for your dynasty draft. Maybe you wouldn't be playing in the toilet bowl. So shame on you for not inviting me into that. But for rookies, I like. There's something about that Corey Davis guy that really seems to really tickle my fancy. I think if he lands in the right place. Yeah, is he a Chicago?
He's a local
right
guy. Yep, yeah. Wheaton went to Wheaton, Warrenville South, did you believe?
Yeah, is it Wheaton? Okay, so he's out of the west suburbs of Chicago. So this guy, he's got size, he's got hands, he's got. Everyone praises his route running skills, and he's older. I think he's been there 4 years. So I think when you get that type of player who's a little older, who's got those, when coaches are praising his route running, then he's got what he needs to be instantly productive at the next level. Especially when it comes to route running, because that is something that they preach all the time at the end of, at that level, is just these rookies understanding the playbook and running the routes correctly. And if Corey Davis has that down already, then he's got the basis to be productive in the next. And he's got the size. So, and he's older. So I think him and Mike Williams would look really impressive down the stretch, I thought. I mean, especially in that big game in the BCS. I mean, God, he's got size, he's got hands, he's got that competitive edge. You got to think he's just going to be an instant production if he's at the next level. And then you don't hear him enough. I mean, I think Deshaun Watson, I mean, what a electrifying player, So if he falls in the right spot, maybe Houston, that would be great. Yeah. He's going to be flying all over the place. And then to have Fuller and D-Hop to throw to, and then have that running game, I mean, God, he can really, if he falls in the right place, he could be a big surprise. Well, not in my book, but to the fans of the NFL. But I think he's just got such raw talent that he can really do some great things at the next level instantly. So those are my guys.
Yeah, I think the thing I take away, and by the way, I agree with you with all four of those guys. I think the thing I take away from this, I'm very excited about this rookie class for dynasty purposes. I think there's a lot of playmakers out there. Fournette and Cook are going to be awesome. I think Davis is going to make an excellent pro as well, and Deshaun Watson could end up being a franchise quarterback that runs a team for 15 years too. I mean, it's going to be a good year. It was a great show. It was a great time having you guys on tonight. John Modaff, Tom Zoretic, the 2016 FFPC Off the Grid champions. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday evening with me talking fantasy and enlightening me and the listeners of how you guys were able to achieve greatness last year. I wish you nothing but the best of luck in 2017 and maybe even a more prosperous year. Thanks so much for coming on the show, guys.
We look forward to
thank you, Eric.
We'll look forward to doing it next year when we win it again. So thank you.
There you go. We'll have you back on. You guys be good. Have a great night.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye.
John Modaff, Tom Zoretic, the 2016 FFPC Off the Grid champions. What a great show it was, and it was awesome having them on. That is going to do it for our show. A bit of housekeeping. I want to thank John and Tom for coming on tonight. I want to thank the FFPC, Rob, Bryce, and of course you for listening in. Dave will be back next week, and we will have on 2016 varsity number 2 $20,000 champion Lauren Brown. He will be on this show as our guest next week. That will be awesome. I want everybody to enjoy the conference championships on Sunday. Hopefully everybody roots the Packers onto the Super Bowl. I know I will be. And I'll be ice fishing this weekend. Your weekend starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com that was broadcast live and heard around the world. Eric and Dave will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from a guest much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
And the list of potential replacements for Gerzak on this show grows by 2 tonight. What a treat. It went like butter. And hopefully I stay warm out on the ice. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll talk to you next week.